Why Germany never stormed Leningrad. On August 9th, 1942, a banquet was supposed to take place at the Hotel Astoria in the very center of Leningrad. The invitations had been printed in advance, elegant cards specifying the date and the hall. German command was so confident the city would soon fall that menus had already been printed for the victory celebration. The banquet never happened. Instead of German officers, that day, the hotel's banquet hall heard Dmitri Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony broadcast through loudspeakers aimed directly at the German positions. A city that was supposed to fall within 6 weeks held out for almost 900 days. To understand why an army, standing just 10 kilometers from Leningrad, with overwhelming technical superiority, never entered the city, we have to go back to the summer of 1941. Operation Barbarossa began on June 22, 1941. The capture of Leningrad was not a secondary objective, but the very first priority. On August 6th, Hitler personally laid out the order. Leningrad first, the Donetsk Basin second, Moscow third. The task of taking the city fell to Army Group North, commanded by Field Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Leeb, a devout Bavarian Catholic and a career staff officer dating back to the Kaiser's army. Under his command stood the 16th and 18th Field Armies, along with the 4th Panzer Group under General Erich Hoepner. From the north, the Finnish army of Marshal Karl Gustav Emil Mannerheim was to advance to meet the Germans. But even at the planning stage, a crack appeared in this arrangement, one that would later prove decisive. Mannerheim personally restricted the mission of his own forces. The Finnish army was to advance only as far as the old Soviet-Finnish border of 1939 and stop there, refusing to take part in a direct assault on the city from the north. He had no wish to take responsibility for the destruction of Petersburg, a city whose military academy he himself had once attended as an officer of the Tsarist army. That decision meant the ring around Leningrad would never fully close in a military sense, and the entire burden of either storming the city or besieging it would fall on the German divisions of Army Group North alone. Von Leeb's plan was simple and German in its directness. Take Leningrad on the move, with a swift armored thrust before Soviet forces could regroup and dig in. At first, the plan worked. By July 10th, German units had reached the Luga River, covering more than 600 kilometers from a border in 18 days, an average of over 30 kilometers a day, a pace impossible for infantry and achievable only by motorized corps. But it was here, along the Luga defensive line, that the advance stalled for nearly 3 weeks. Soviet command rushed in reserves, mobilized the citizens of Leningrad to dig anti-tank trenches, and for the first time the blitzkrieg tempo that was supposed to deliver the Germans to the city within days began to falter. By late August, Army Group North resumed its advance. On September 8th, units of the 18th Army captured Schlisselburg on the southern shore of Lake Ladoga, severing the last land route connecting Leningrad to the rest of the country. From that day began the blockade, which would last 872 days. On September 19th, the leading German units came to a halt just 10 kilometers from the city limits, close enough that on a clear day, the domes of St. Isaac's Cathedral were visible through binoculars. According to Soviet figures, Army Group North strength at this stage stood at roughly 517,000 men, against 725,000 defenders of the Leningrad Front and the simultaneously forming Northwestern Front. A numerical advantage that, on paper, lay with the defenders, making a direct assault on the city a gamble with an unpredictable price. And it was in these very days, on September 15th, 1941, that von Leeb received the order that would determine the entire future of the city. Hoepner's 4th Panzer Group, the main battering ram on which the whole plan of assault depended, was being withdrawn and redeployed south to Army Group Center. Chief of the German General Staff, Franz Halder, had persuaded Hitler that the tanks were needed more urgently outside Moscow, where Operation Typhoon was being prepared. Von Leeb, a seasoned staff officer, could only report upward what was now obvious. Without armored spearheads, a metropolitan area of 3,103,000 people could not be taken without enormous bloodshed. A storming assault would now be possible only at the cost of catastrophic losses in street fighting, and Army Group North no longer had the reserve for such an operation. In these same weeks, Hitler made a decision that turned the question of an assault from a military matter into an ideological one. On July 8th, Chief of Staff Halder recorded in his diary, "The Führer is firmly determined to level Moscow and Leningrad to the ground, in order to be completely freed of their populations, whom we would otherwise have to feed through the winter." On September 22nd, the headquarters of Army Group North received a directive stating outright, St. Petersburg must be erased from the face of the earth. The city was not to be occupied at all. It was to be surrounded by a tight ring, subjected to artillery bombardment and air raids, cut off from supply, and forced into capitulation through starvation. German soldiers on the front line did not share this logic. Joseph Goebbels noted in his diary around this time, "The troops are shouting as one. We want to march forward." Many wanted to storm the city. The orders said otherwise. On September 10th, while the ring around the city had not yet fully closed, Stalin removed Marshal Kliment Voroshilov, a hero of the Civil War, but a commander who had failed to organize an adequate defense, from command of the Leningrad front, and replaced him with General of the Army Georgy Zhukov. A month earlier, Zhukov had lost his post as chief of the General Staff after clashing with Stalin over the defense of Kiev. Now he was given a chance to prove himself on the most difficult sector of the front. Zhukov immediately tightened discipline, threw in reserves of the Baltic Fleet and naval infantry, and within a few weeks stabilized the defensive line at a point where the German offensive was already losing momentum without Hoepner's tanks. On October 8th, as the situation outside Moscow turned critical, Zhukov was recalled from the Leningrad front and sent there instead. The line he had managed to reinforce would hold without him for more than 800 days to come. On September 12th, a German bomb struck the Badaev warehouses, the city's largest food depot. Stocks of flour and sugar that, by various estimates, could have sustained the city for several weeks went up in flames. Just a week later, on September 19th, the Luftwaffe carried out one of the heaviest single-day raids of the entire siege. Roughly 2,500 high-explosive and incendiary bombs in one day. Over the course of the siege as a whole, no fewer than 75,000 bombs would fall on Leningrad. By November of 1941, the bread ration for non-working residents had dropped to 125 grams a day, a piece the size of a deck of cards, mixed with cellulose and wallpaper paste alongside what little flour remained. The average daily death toll in the city reached 1,500 people. On Christmas Day 1941, by the German calendar, 3,700 people died in a single 24 hours. The only artery of life left was the Road of Life, an ice route across Lake Ladoga, opened in November of 1941, which carried flour into the city and carried out those too weak to survive. Of the nearly 3.5 million pre-war residents of the city and its suburbs, 1,743,000 people were evacuated by this and other routes between June of 1941 and March of 1943, for 114,000 of them children. On December 20th, as the situation outside Moscow grew critical and field commanders began requesting permission to withdraw, Hitler issued an order that applied to Army Group North as well. The will to hold the line must be instilled in every unit. Only this kind of fighting will buy us the time we need to bring up the reinforcements I have ordered. There was no longer any talk of retreat from Leningrad, any more than from Moscow. The siege had finally hardened from a temporary measure into a long-term strategy. It was not until January 18, 1943, during Operation Iskra, that the Leningrad and Fokhov fronts broke through along the southern shore of Lake Ladoga and opened a narrow land corridor only a few kilometers wide, later known as the Road to Victory. This did not lift the blockade entirely, but for the first time in a year and a half, it gave the city a direct rail link to the rest of the country. The ring would not be broken completely for another year. On January 27, 1944, 872 days after the siege began. According to various estimates, both Soviet archival figures and later independent research, the number of civilian deaths in Leningrad ranges from 800,000 to 1.5 million people, the overwhelming majority from starvation rather than from bombing or shelling. That is more than the combined military losses of the United States and the United Kingdom for the entire Second World War. The military losses of Army Group North itself during the first months of fighting near Leningrad are estimated by Soviet sources at roughly 60,000 killed and captured. By comparison, Soviet losses over the same period exceeded 214,000, and total irrecoverable losses, including equipment, reached 345,000. So why did a German army, standing at the very outskirts of the Soviet Union's second-largest city, never enter it? The answer lies neither in a shortage of soldiers nor in a military failure in the conventional sense. The armored spearhead on which von Lieb's entire plan depended was taken away for another purpose: the drive on Moscow, which, as we already know, would also end in failure. Germany's Finnish ally to the north had refused from the very start to close the ring completely, and left without tanks. The German command deliberately chose a different strategy. Not an assault with its unpredictable cost in street fighting, but the slow strangulation of the city through blockade, bombardment, and starvation, a strategy explicitly sanctioned by Hitler's own directives calling for Leningrad to be erased from the face of the earth. A city that was supposed to fall within 6 weeks held out for almost 900 days and outlasted the army that never dared to enter its streets in open battle.